the tool that I use to destroy them. That's what chapters 38 and 39 are all about. Now the question is this symbolic language or literal language? I understood this to be symbolic of the new Israel, the church, defeating the powers of evil. For most of its history, the church has understood these to be symbolic descriptions of the church's defeat of evil, so that eventually all evil in the world would be defeated, righteousness would rule, and then Jesus Christ could return to rule upon the earth for his millennium, his 1,000-year reign that is predicted in Revelation. This is known as post-millennialism. Christ will come at the end of the reign of righteousness. That's what John Wesley believed. That's what most of the church has believed throughout its history. Not all. There were early premillennialists. But for most of its history, the church has been post-millennial. The reign of righteousness will come on earth, and then Christ will return. In the middle of the last century, in part because of the rise of destructive biblical criticism saying none of the stuff in the Bible is true, there began to be a new rise of literal interpretation. So that basically you say, unless something is obviously symbolic, like the Psalms or something like that, unless it's obviously symbolic, you must take it literally. This gave rise to what is today known as dispensationalism. That by reading the Bible very, very literally, you say God works this way and only this way during this time frame, this dispensation. And then in the next dispensation, he only works in this way, not that way. In the next dispensation, he only works this way, not that way or that way. And so you can get some dispensational teachers who will say there are 5 dispensations, others will say there are 7, and God only works one way in each dispensation. Now this has got some problems, as always is the case whenever you try to force God into a box. Dispensationalism says the Jews were saved by obedience to the law. There was no grace in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, Christians are saved by faith, and holy living is not necessary for faith, for redemption. Holy living, that was for the Jews. Us Christians, that's for faith. And that's what you see all over America today. Now, please understand me. I would much rather, if I have to choose my bedfellow, have a believing dispensationalist than a skeptical liberal. Thank God for dispensationalists who love Jesus, who love the Bible, and are trying to win people to Christ every way they can. However, we're seeing in America the very sad byproduct of this teaching, and that is, well, I'm saved by faith. I'm saved by grace. And yes, I try to live a holy life, but of course nobody can, and I don't really expect to. Well, if you expect to sin, you probably will. And we ought not to be too surprised to see somebody like Jimmy Swaggart or others falling into the enemy's trap. They don't believe they can live a holy life. Holy living, that's for the Jews. We're saved by grace. Oh, my, that's not true. That's not true. Nobody in the Old Testament was saved by obedience to the law. They were saved by grace. And they showed that they were saved by grace by living obedient, holy lives. Now I want to tell you, that's the very same thing Paul teaches. He says, don't you dare believe that you can bring yourself to God by doing that old law. You try to do that, it'll curse you. It'll damn you. No, no, no. The only way you come to God is by faith in the gracious blood of the cross. That's how you come to God. You're free from that old law. And then, at the very moment when everybody's saying, yippee, goody, we'll go live like the devil, Paul says, what? No. Now that you've received the grace of Christ, of course you're not going to steal. Of course you're not going to lie. Of course you're not going to commit adultery. Of course you're going to live a holy life. You'll keep the law. It's one pattern of salvation from beginning to end. Okay. Now, most modern prophecy teaching stems from this dispensational view, that you've got to take every one of these statements absolutely literally. This, of course, has given rise to premillennialism. That is, that the world is in fact going to get worse and worse and worse and worse, and then Christ will come, and then will be the reign of righteousness. He will return before the millennium. That's a very recent doctrine in the church. Now, I happen to believe it. I think it's the correct understanding that Christ is going to come back before the millennium. But I do not accept the rest of dispensational teaching, and I do not accept the idea that all of these prophecies must be taken literally. You say, do you have any evidence for this kind of mixing of literal and symbolic? Thank you for asking. I do. Jesus is sitting at the well. A woman comes with a jug on her head. He says, woman, give me a drink, please. She says, why is a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman? If you knew who I was, I would give you rivers of living water. Literal? She took him literally. She said, how are you going to give me any living water? You don't even have a jug. He did the same thing with Nicodemus. Nicodemus says, oh, you're a great teacher. Nobody could do the things you do if they weren't from heaven. Jesus says, let me tell you something. You're never going to see heaven unless you go to the delivery room again. Unless you get born all over again. What? I'm an old man. How am I going to go back in my mother's womb? Jesus had switched into symbolic language, and they didn't catch it. The Bible does that all the time. It switches back and forth. We say, God, why do you do that to us? And God says, because if I told you really literally what was going to happen, you wouldn't understand it. Well, what's the indication that 38 and 39 should be taken in a symbolic sense? A number of things. First of all, the weaponry. Is this the last battle? Then why are they using swords and wooden implements? It says they're going to have so much wood left over from the torn down weapons that they won't have to collect wood to burn for their fires for months and months. Some dispensational prophetic teachers say, oh well, this is after a worldwide atomic war and all metal will be radiated, and so they'll have to use wood again. I think Ezekiel is using language that his own people are familiar with to talk about events. And don't misunderstand me. I'm confident that there are events that are being talked about here. I just don't think they're being talked about literally. When they happen, you and I will be able to look back at chapters 38 and 39 and say, oh, yes, that's what he was talking about. See, the same thing happened with the Messiah. The Jews tended to read the Messianic prophecies in narrow, limited ways according to their own understandings, and they missed him. That's one of my anxieties about interpreting these things too literally. Because if I may get it worked out all neatly, and God will come and do it another way, and I say, sorry, that's not God. I mean, that doesn't agree with my book that I wrote. Another indication that we're talking symbolically is the names of the enemies. Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Togarmah. Those are the names of savage tribes that had come down out of the Caucasus Mountains into Armenia in Ezekiel's lifetime. And those savage tribes were attacking villages and destroying, killing people brutally. They're symbolic of the evil nations of this world. And God says He'll use Israel to destroy them. Now again, is it possible that some of these events have already happened? In 1973, the Arab countries attacked Israel on Sunday afternoon, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And for once, the Israeli intelligence was caught napping. The Syrians had more tanks on that northern border than the combined number of the Russian and German tanks at the Battle of Kursk in 1943, which was the largest tank battle ever fought in the world. The Syrians had more tanks massed there. That afternoon, the Israelis ran out of ammunition. And the tank commanders, the Syrian tank commanders said, this must be a trap. Israelis never run out of ammunition. For 5 hours that Sunday afternoon, there was nothing between those tanks on the heights of Golan and the major Israeli air base in the valley of Jezreel, which is guarded by tactical atomic weapons. For 5 hours, the world hung in the balance. Atomic holocaust stared us right in the face. Finally, the tank commanders decided, hey, they must be out of ammunition. And so they started their columns. By that time, the Israelis had rearmed. And all of those tank columns were smashed. The armies from the north? Oh, they didn't have wooden weapons. They had weapons. And God delivered His people. Another example, I think, of the symbolic language here is the fact that they are burying bodies for 7 months. Now, please understand me. I do not want to say that any of these things couldn't happen. That's not the point at all. God deliver us from saying, God can't do it this way, God has to do it that way, that sort of thing. I'm simply saying to you, there's some clues here that suggest to us that this is symbolic language. Talking about real events? Yes, I think so. But primarily to make a point. Israel is little and helpless. Remember when Ezekiel was writing this. The exile is just beginning. Jerusalem has just been destroyed. The people are in captivity. They are dead. They are desiccated. Their bones are scattered. They are helpless. And Ezekiel says, oh, don't you believe it. God is going to use you as the bright implement in His hands to either bring light to the nations or destruction to the nations, depending on their response. That's the point that Ezekiel is trying to make to you and to me. Do you feel helpless? Do you feel worthless? Do you feel useless? Don't you believe it. Our God is able to take the dead, desiccated bones, lifeless bones, and give them life and use them for His glory. I don't know how He's going to use you, but He's going to do it. Believe it. Believe it. We turn then, and you didn't think we'd get here, we turn to chapters 40 to 48, the second subdivision here. A was promises of restoration. B is plans for restoration, chapters 40 to 48. There are, again, for those of you who have been faithfully trying to follow along with the outline as I have given it, number one is plans for the restored temple, and that is chapters 40 to 44. The second segment here is plans for the restored land, chapters 45 to 48. Plans for the restored temple, 40 to 44. Plans for the destroyed land, 45 to 48. Now again, the dispensationalists say that this must be taken literally. Especially because Jews can't be saved without sacrifices. So if Jews are to be saved in the end of the age, we've got to have a temple again where animal sacrifices are being offered. That's why the dispensationalists are so convinced that right now in a warehouse in Jerusalem there is Bedford limestone from a quarry in Bedford, Indiana. If you've been to Israel, why in the world you would ever ship limestone to Israel ought to be a big question in your mind. That's the one thing Israel really grows a lot of, and that's rocks. Again, God deliver us from being skeptics. Maybe the temple will be rebuilt. But I'm confident there will not be animal sacrifices offered in that temple. We have a better sacrifice. Jesus Christ the righteous, the Lamb of God, has come, and lambs don't need to die anymore. Micah said it a long time. How can the blood of bulls and goats cover my sin? If I could give rivers of oil, what good would it do? Should I give the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So, there may well be a temple rebuilt. If there is, it'll certainly be the Third World War. But I'm confident there won't be sacrifices. No, I believe that Ezekiel is not understanding himself as giving literal plans. You say, well, what makes you think that? Because the second temple that they rebuilt beginning in 536, that was not built to these plans. And the third temple, Herod's temple, was not built to these plans. No, what you're doing is you are presenting a picture of that perfect spiritual symmetry and harmony that exists where the glory of God is. And so you see in the middle of this section on the plans for the restored temple, chapter 43, verses 1 to 12, the glory returns. Back in chapters 10 and 11, the glory had left the temple of Solomon. Now the glory comes back. But friends, where does the glory of God live today? Where are the 4 cherubim with their 4 faces and their flashing wings? Where are the thundering wheels? Where is the throne of God? Is it in some building somewhere? No. Here is the temple of God. Do you not know you are the temple of God? Where does the glory of God want to live? In some building somewhere? No. The reality of God, the glory of God, we have seen in the face of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ intends to take up his residence in every one of us, in lives of harmony and symmetry and serenity. So you see this building where everything is matched. There's a gate on the east, there's a gate on the north, there's a gate in the south. That's to the outer court. Then there's an inner court, and there's a gate on the north, there's a gate on the east, there's a gate on the south. Everything on the north side is matched on the south side. The temple, again, is perfectly symmetrical. Where God lives, there is peace, there is harmony, there is symmetry. Everything fits together. That's what shalom is. Shalom is to put the pieces together into one harmonious whole. My shalom I give to you, not as the world gives, give I unto you. God wants to put his temple in your life and mine. The place where the glory of God can dwell and the world can know that he is the Lord. And so you move from the destruction, the ruins, the smoking wreckage that inhabits the minds and the visions of the Jewish people. Loss, terrible loss, hopelessness, nothing. My past is infinite pain, and my future is the abyss. And God says, Ezekiel, give them a new vision. Give them new pictures. Give them pictures of wholeness and harmony and symmetry. Give them new pictures to replace the old ones. Does God need to give you some new pictures? God need to give you some new visions of your life? All you see is wreckage, smoking wreckage. Will you say to him, O Lord, let me see your face. Let me see your life. Let me see your dreams. Let those be the pictures of my mind. How good of God to give Ezekiel this kind of imagery. Now remember, I've been saying all along that Ezekiel sees this as a new captivity and a new exodus. All the way through, hundreds of times, well, not hundreds, but tens of times, we've seen that phrase, then they will know I am the Lord, right out of Exodus. And so, remember how the book of Exodus ends? With the plans for the tabernacle. So it's entirely fitting that the book of Ezekiel, which is speaking about a spiritual restoration, ultimately, primarily, I'm going to take you home to your land, yes, but oh my, that's not enough. I'm going to cleanse you. I'm going to give you a new heart. I'm going to put my spirit within you. That's the real restoration. And so, spiritually speaking, we've got the new vision of what we may be as the temple of God. But also, the Exodus story ends with the division of the land in Joshua. God has kept his promises, and now we divide the land. And so again, in chapters 45 2:48, we have the division of the land. Now this one really, I think you have to say, is symbolic, because it's a very, very stereotyped division without any attention to geography or anything else. Each tribe has a strip of land about 20 miles wide and anywhere from 40 miles long to, down in the south, 75 miles long. There they are. 7 strips north of the holy site and 5 strips south of the holy site, extending from the Jordan Valley to the sea, and there it is. No attempt to deal with the issues of how do geographic lines go. No. We're simply talking about God has not forgotten His promises. He will keep His promises to His people. He will keep His ancient promises to you and to me. He'll be faithful. As the glory of the Lord returning is sort of the spark that shines in the middle of chapters 40 to 44, there's a spark that shines here in the middle of the promises of the division of the land. And that spark, that shining spark, is the river of life. Praise His name. There it comes. Now again, that central sector is fascinating. It's 8 1/3 miles square. By the way, this is a good reason to get the New Living Translation. It doesn't fool around with this cubit stuff. It just gives you feet and miles, like God intended. It's an 8 1/3 mile square. And the top 3 1/3 mile strip is where the priests live. Where the Levites live. The second 3 1/3 mile strip is where the priests are and where the temple area is. And then there's a 1 2/3 mile strip down at the bottom, and that's where the city is. And the city is in the middle of that 1 1/2 mile square. And then the priest has a 15 mile by 8 1/3 mile stretch on the east out to the Jordan, and a 30 by 8 1/3 mile stretch out to the Mediterranean. There's the temple area. The temple is not in the city. The temple stands apart from the city. And there in all of its beauty, coming from the south side of the temple, under the foundation, running past the altar, is a little stream of water. It runs out through that east gate, the east gate that is to be closed after the Spirit comes through it until the Messiah comes. Out under that threshold runs the stream, out. The farther it goes, the wider it gets. Deeper, wider. When you first get into it, you can wade through it. The next time you get into it, it's up to the knees, and then the hips. And finally, all you can do is just let yourself go. The river of life. God's abundant life.